Fantasy Football Show, the place where you receive expert fantasy advice for champions. With your host, NFL fantasy football expert, analyst, and draft scout, Lance Goodman.
Hello, NFL football fans, fantasy football owners. Welcome back to the Extra Points Fantasy Football Show, the place where you get expert fantasy advice for champions. As always, I'm your host, NFL fantasy football expert, analyst, and draft scout, Lance Goodman. We're heading into week 5 of the NFL fantasy football season, and today marks our first segment where we're going to be hitting the stock market, taking a look at what players are trending up and down. Obviously, those guys trending up are big time performers, making it happen for your team, responsible for those W's in your win column. The players not performing so well, we've got some decisions to make. We're either going to have to put those guys on the bench, maybe look to package them up in a trade, or if there are better options on the waiver wire, drop them all together. Tonight, we've got a doubleheader for Monday Night Football. It's the Miami Dolphins playing the New York Jets, as well as the Cincinnati Bengals playing the Denver Broncos. So those 4 teams and their respective players won't be included in our rankings in regards to a 4-week sample size. Let's go ahead and get things started at the quarterback position and take a look at who's trending up and down on the stock market. When you look at our top 4 ranked guys from a week ago, when you talk about Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Justin Herbert, and Caleb Williams of the Chicago Bears, all 4 of those guys performing well in terms of fantasy football and putting up the numbers. If there is a concern, it's definitely going to be Baltimore quarterback Lamar Jackson, who suffered a hamstring injury late in the Ravens' loss at the Kansas City Chiefs. When it comes to hamstrings, you know those are injuries that usually cause players to miss a couple weeks of time. Let's keep our fingers crossed. Hope that it's nothing serious, but Lamar Jackson is a guy we've most notably got to keep our eyes on because, again, those hamstring injuries are ones that can linger and be a major problem, especially for a guy like Lamar Jackson who uses his legs as a major part of his game. Coming in at number 5, this is a guy who we're really concerned about when you talk about Jalen Hurts of the Philadelphia Eagles. In terms of overall production, not bad. A guy who certainly figures out a way to pick up rushing touchdowns, a lot of days to save his numbers. But the huge concern is what's going on with that Eagles passing game. Jalen Hurts has passed for less than 150 yards in 3 out of the Eagles' first 4 games, and let alone for a guy who's as talented as Jalen Hurts and has offensive playmakers around him like wide receivers, A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith, a tight end like Dallas Goedert, a running back like Saquon Barkley, a top 5 offensive line. It's really unheard of for any quarterback in the NFL, regardless of what team he's on, to pass for less than 150 yards in 3 out of their first 4 games. So he is a guy who you see that X next to his name is highlighted in green because we know he's a big time player. We know he has the studs around him when it comes to skill position teams, but that X also represents a cause for concern. I'm not sure how much longer this Eagles offense and fantasy football owners are going to be able to trust a guy who's only averaging 150 pass yards per game. Now let's move on to our guys ranked 6 through 10. You see the Jared Goff, Patrick Mahomes, Baker Mayfield, Brock Purdy, all of those guys trending upward. You see at number 7 is Jaden Daniels. He has a green X next to his name. The first 2 games of the season, he was up over 20 points per contest, but he's missed the last 2 games with a knee sprain. So we just want to make sure when he comes back, he's fully healthy. But I think when you look at what backup quarterback Marcus Mariota did in his absence, we know that Jaden Daniels at the absolute minimal can do that. I also like to add in for Brock Purdy. Did not have the best game in his return on the 49ers loss against the Jaguars, but still had over 300 passing yards, a couple passing TDs. If he can clean up the turnovers, as well as get some of his playmakers back in the passing game, I don't have any major concerns there. Now let's move on to quarterbacks ranked 11 through 20. Matthew Stafford, huge game this past Sunday at home against the Indianapolis Colts. 375 passing yards, 3 TD passes, including a huge 88-yarder to help the Rams get that victory over the Indianapolis Colts. When you look at Dak Prescott, another guy who pumped in the huge fantasy numbers at home against the Green Bay Packers, 4 total touchdowns for him. Daniel Jones, although he threw 2 interceptions, really should have had a 70-yard TD to his credit. A second-year wide receiver, Adonai Mitchell, made a huge mistake and dropped the football before crossing the plane of the goal line. So Daniel Jones could have had even bigger numbers there, but still went out, threw for 262 yards and 2 TDs against a very tough Rams defense on the roll. And then Sam Darnold, you like the direction that he's trending. That Seattle offense is ball control, but when you have a number 1 receiver like Jackson Smith and Jigba, certainly positive things you can do there. When you look at number 15, Bo Nix of the Denver Broncos, arrow pointing down right now, just not living up to the capabilities that he was expected to be playing coming into the season. He was a guy who was really getting taken ahead of a Matthew Stafford, of a Caleb Williams in draft. So we'd like for him to turn it around soon, but right now, certainly not playing up to expectation. When you move on to number 16, you see Justin Fields. He's got a green X next to his name. Looked great in week 1. Left out of week 2's game against the Buffalo Bills very early with a concussion. Missed week 3. He'll be back tonight for the New York Jets as long as he can get back to form. He certainly was a guy who was trending in the right direction as well. A guy who's really balling out right now. We're talking about Drake May, quarterback for the New England Patriots, stacking up the big numbers, had another big day on Sunday at home against Carolina. 2 passing TDs, another rush TD. This guy is turning into a big-time dual-threat quarterback. When you look at number 18, Kyler Murray, another guy simply not living up to the expectations that we expected for him to be coming into the season. I think getting some rushing touchdowns certainly could help his cause out a lot. Let's look at number 19, number 2021, Aaron Rodgers, Jordan Love, Tua Tagovailoa. All of those guys in the right situations can put up the big numbers. I think for Aaron Rodgers, and when you look at what he's doing in Pittsburgh, at least as a floor minimum, he's a guy who should be able to get you a nice 225 to 250 yards and a couple of TD passes. Jordan Love was a part of that shootout in Dallas on Sunday night, had a huge game as well. And Tua Tagovailoa, in real football is risky, but in fantasy football, in the right matchups, another guy you should be able to lean on for 250 passing yards and a couple TDs. 22 through 25, those guys are highlighted in yellow, basically means lukewarm. Can't absolutely trust them. It's all about situations. When you talk about Carson Wentz, Jake Browning, both of those backup quarterbacks for Minnesota and Cincinnati. Bad Geno, good Geno is always a struggle. 2 good games, 2 bad games for Geno Smith for the Las Vegas Raiders. Trevor Lawrence has some nice pieces around him, but still makes timely mistakes. And then we round out the bottom of our rankings when you see 26, 27, pretty much everybody outside of Michael Penix at number 30. All of those guys trending down for obvious reason. They're on the bottom of our list for that reason exactly. All right, let's go ahead and run to a quick break. When we come back, we'll shift our attention over to the running back rankings. It's the Extra Points Fantasy Football Show. We'll be right back. football fans, fantasy football owners, welcome back to the Extra Points Fantasy Football Show, the place where you get expert fantasy advice for champions. Let's go ahead now and hop back on the stock market. Let's pay attention to our running back rankings and see what guys are trending up and down after the first 4 weeks of the season. When we take a look at our top 10, everybody thriving and flourishing and doing well when you talk about Jonathan Taylor, Christian McCaffrey, James Cook, Saquon Barkley, Jahmyr Gibbs, Bijan Robinson, Kyren Williams, Omarion Hampton, Bucky Irvin. If there's one guy I've got concern about right now who we're lukewarm on the first 4 weeks of the season, and that's going to be Derrick Henry of the Baltimore Ravens. First time in a long time in his career where 3 out of the first 4 games of the season, he's under 65 rushing yards. We know it's a matchup-based business, so we can't deny that the Kansas City Chiefs and teams like the Cleveland Browns have top 5, top 10 run defenses. Derrick Henry has also struggled with fumbles. And I think that's something mentally that may have a bit of a stronghold on him. First time in his career where he's fumbled in 3 out of the first 4 games. And that was the first 3 games in a row of a season. Also, if you consider that Baltimore could be without quarterback Lamar Jackson, if that hamstring injury proves to be serious, I think Derrick Henry is the guy on this list we had the most concern about because out of all these running backs, he's the least involved in the passing game. And we consistently talk about that is why these guys like Jahmyr Gibbs. Christian McCaffrey is a perfect example yesterday. Only had 49 rushing yards, but 6 catches for 92 yards. So those PPR running backs, what saves them a lot of days and allows for them to continue to pump in big numbers, if they're not effective running the football, they can still get it done catching out of the backfield. And that is something that is simply not a strong suit of Derrick Henry. Let's go ahead and move on to running backs 11 through 20. A lot of guys on here doing their thing. When you talk about Kenneth Walker III, despite being in the committee with fellow running back Zach Charbonnet, still continues to have very strong games. You have to like Javonte Williams of the Dallas Cowboys, another strong outing on Sunday Night Football against the Green Bay Packers. Devon Achane still in complete control of that Miami Dolphins backfield. How about Travis Etienne? A $124 on the ground against the San Francisco 49ers in the Jaguars upset win on the road at San Francisco. He is absolutely killing it right now. Same holds true for Josh Jacobs. A couple rushing touchdowns yesterday. And you have to like J.K. Dobbins start with 3 TDs in the first 3 games for the Denver Broncos. Some guys I'm lukewarm on right now. And again, when you're looking at if players are trending up and down, when you see the yellow, that means that we're lukewarm on those guys. And for all of these guys we're about to talk about, the main thing is that they need to stay PPR relevant, alluding to what I was just talking about with those first batch of running backs where I use Christian McCaffrey as an example. If you are not able to pick up rushing yards in the NFL, and that's not an easy thing to do, you need to be able to catch passes out of the backfield. You have to be involved in the passing game or your numbers could be modest. So when you take a look at number 15, Chuba Hubbard of the Carolina Panthers, 18, Jalen Warren of the Pittsburgh Steelers, DeAndre Swift of the Chicago Bears, Alvin Kamara of the New Orleans Saints. All of those guys have not seen a ton of daylight on the ground. Not your typical PPR guys. I think for Alvin Kamara and DeAndre Swift, Jalen Warren as well. Definitely capable and involved in that passing game, but these guys really need to rely on that passing game because their offenses and their offensive lines just aren't producing a lot in terms of opening up holes for the ground game. All right, let's go ahead and move through our guy at 21 through 32 to round out our list. Let's go ahead and start. How about our rookies at number 22, 23, and 25? When you're talking about Cam Scatterbull of the New York Giants, Austin Gentry of the Las Vegas Raiders, and Quinshon Judkins of the Cleveland Browns. All of those guys have firm control of their backfields, doing their thing. Austin Gentry, 3 big touchdowns, finally got off the schneid, had the huge game the fantasy football owners were looking for and what made him a first-round draft pick. When you look at Cam Scatterbull, even though he didn't score a touchdown, 25 carries, he's going to be carrying the workload for that Giants backfield for quite some time with rookie quarterback Jackson Dart, and especially while fellow running back Tyrone Tracy Jr. is out with an injury. And then Quinshon Judkins continues to impress early on for the Cleveland Browns, getting a full workload. Good to see him involved in the passing game as well. And I think that's a big difference from those running backs we just talked about, lukewarm with yellow. All 3 of these rookie running backs are involved in their team's passing game. When you look at guys 21, 24, 26, 28, 29, when we're talking about Jordan Mason, Chase Brown, David Montgomery, Breece Hall, and Trey Benson, All of those guys, very important that they're involved in the passing game. I know it's something that you've heard me say quite a few times in the segment, but fantasy football owners know if you're unable to get it done on the ground, being able to catch out of the backfield is a huge asset and benefit, especially in full point PPR leagues, where you're not only getting points for the yards they pick up, but a full point for one reception. I think when you look at those guys, Chase Brown, we talked about him in a segment last week about players we have concern about. He's a perfect example with Joe Burrow out for the season for the Cincinnati Bengals, bad offensive line, not averaging a lot of yards per carry, not getting a lot of goal line touches and opportunities. He's a guy who's got to be involved in that passing game. And I like to really highlight him because he's a guy who was taken high up in fantasy football drafts. You know, Jordan Mason, not your typical guy. David Montgomery, seems like Jahmyr Gibbs is kind of putting more of a stronghold on that backfield out there for the Detroit Lions. I think it'll be interesting to see what Breece Hall does tonight against the Miami Dolphins in somewhat of a committee with fellow running back Braylon Allen. As for Trey Benson of the Arizona Cardinals, very short sample size, only one game. And so at this point, we need to give him a little bit more time to see if he can produce. Let's go ahead now and round out our list with guys who simply aren't performing well. These are guys who you are definitely going to have on your bench, maybe unless you're in deeper leagues, but very, very risky. Not getting a lot of catches out of the backfield, not getting goal line opportunities unless these guys are up over 100 rushing yards, which is becoming more and more of a rarity in today's NFL. These guys are going to be hard to trust in your lineup. When we talk about Tony Pollard of the Tennessee Titans, Nick Chubb of the Houston Texans, that Commanders backfield, which is running the committee. None of those guys had over 10 carries yesterday, and the same is going to hold true for that New England Patriots backfield with the mix of rookie Travion Henderson and veteran Ramondre Stevenson. Even though the New England Patriots put up 42 points yesterday, blew the Carolina Panthers off the football field, neither one of those guys had over 10 carries as well. All right, that is going to wrap up our segment. We're going to run to another quick break. When we come back, it'll be more of the Extra Points Fantasy Football Show, so don't you go anywhere. All right, NFL football fans, fantasy football owners, welcome back to the Extra Points Fantasy Football Show. Let's go ahead and hop right back on the stock market. Today, we're taking our first look at what players are trending up and down after the first 4 weeks of the season. Again, our players who are trending up, where you see that arrow going up, those guys are performing well, making it happen with your fantasy football teams. Guys are must starts on a weekly basis. Yellow represents guys we're lukewarm on, a bit inconsistent. We'd like to see them perform more on a consistent basis. And obviously our guys with our arrows in the red who are down, those are the guys right now who you are going to put on your bench look to package up in a trade, or again, perhaps look to drop if there are some more viable assets on the waiver wire. All right, let's now go ahead and move over to the wide receiver position. And when you look at that top 10, everybody thriving and doing well, at least 3 out of the first 4 games, if not all 4, which certainly holds true for our number 1 guy, and that will be Puka Nacua of the Los Angeles Rams. But all of these guys in our top 10, when you talk about Puka Nacua, Jackson Smith-Njigba, Emeka Ibuka, Rome Odunze, Quentin Johnston, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Zay Flowers, all of these guys, Keenan Allen, 3 out of their first 4 games, off to a strong start and making it happen for owners. When you look at number 6, when we talk about CeeDee Lamb, he's got a green X next to him, and that is simply for the fact that he is out injured right now with an ankle injury, but got off to a hot start as well. His first 2 games before being injured in week 3, he had back-to-back 100-yard games. Let's go ahead now and move over to our guys ranked 11 through 20. Let's go ahead and start with the good. When you look at Devontae Adams of the Los Angeles Raiders, Garrett Wilson of the New York Jets, Deebo Samuel of the Washington Commanders, Courtland Sutton of the Denver Broncos. Those guys ranked 11, 16, 17, and 18, all trending in the right directions, all continuing to do their thing. You can look at Devontae Williams and Deebo Samuel, both of those guys with TD catches in week 4. When you look at Courtland Sutton and Garrett Wilson, again, keep in mind we shoot this show on a Monday afternoon. So again, both of those guys are playing tonight in that Monday night doubleheader when the Jets play the Dolphins and the Broncos play the Cincinnati Bengals. When we look at guys 12 and 19, where you see that green X there for Mike Evans, got off to a hot start, double digits in all 3 of his first 3 games, but left out of week 3 with a hamstring injury. So again, a guy who was balling, just out right now with an injury, probably going to be out for another 3 weeks dealing with a hamstring. So can't do anything for you now, but when he gets back in the lineup, we know he's one of the greatest wide receivers of all time. And then when you take a look also at Nico Collins, a guy whose ceiling is just lowered right now. That Texans offense, just not a lot to offer besides him in the passing game. So defenses are really making it their business to double team him, to look to take him out of the equation. Also, quarterback CJ Stroud really not playing a confident brand of football. They've got a new offensive coordinator over there, not running the football effectively. Questions on the offensive line. So all of those things factor into his production being down a little bit, but we know how talented he is as a player. Still the number 1 option for that Texans offense. And without question, as long as he's healthy, he'll still be able to do on most days what he did this past Sunday, which was not a great day, but still found his way to double-digit points. When you look at guy 13, when you talk about Jamar Chase, he's got a green X next to his name as well. That is simply for the fact we are in wait-and-see mode. The reality of the situation is the first 2 out of 3 games this season did not put up good fantasy football numbers. Definitely going to be affected by starter Joe Burrow being out for the season. But again, we know that Chase, one of the best wide receivers, if not the best wide receiver in the NFL from an individual talent standpoint, got a backup in Jake Browning. This is a matchup-based business. Tough matchup tonight against the Denver Broncos. I think it's going to be real interesting to see how his numbers look. You look at Ricky Pearsall, he's got the yellow next to his name. Just lukewarm right now. A couple strong games for San Francisco. A couple games where really not that impactful. And then when you look at number 20, Trey Tucker, and we're going to tie him in over to number 21, Wan'Dale Robinson. We talked about both of those guys last week where through the first 3 games of the season, we wanted to give them their credit. They were guys who put up big fantasy numbers, but again, guys who as the season wear on, you know that they're not going to remain in the top 20, maybe able to remain in the top 40 to 50, depending on usage. But again, we gave them credit, and we like to do that, especially for lesser guys, because we know their names may not be that relevant throughout the course of the season. Now, let's look at some other guys making it happen in that 21 through 30 rankings. When you talk about Tyreek Hill of the Miami Dolphins, George Pickens of the Cowboys, Drake London of the Atlanta Falcons, Justin Jefferson of the Minnesota Vikings, DK Metcalf of the Pittsburgh Steelers, all of those guys trending in the right direction. You look at the big game that George Pickens had in week 3, 8 catches, $134, 2 TDs. Drake London, another guy, huge game for the Atlanta Falcons. You also look at DK Metcalf, big 80-yard TD catch in that Sunday morning matchup against the Minnesota Vikings. And in that same game, it was Justin Jefferson who's gotten a boost in value now that Carson Wentz is at quarterback. 10 catches, $128. So you love what all of those guys are doing in your lineup. Now let's move over to guys 27, 28, and 30. When we talk about Chris Olave, rookie Ted McMillan, and Jacoby Myers, this is going to be a situation that could be game to game, situational, and matchup based for all of their respective teams. They are the number 1 wide receiver on the depth chart. But when you look at Geno Smith at quarterback for Jacoby Myers, Bryce Young at quarterback for Ted McMillan, and you look at Spencer Rattler at quarterback for Chris Olave, that inconsistent quarterback play is going to make those guys risky. I think they're probably more in a boom or bust mode. I definitely like the prospects for Olave, McMillan, and Myers. But again, like we've seen in week 3, very difficult to do when you have a bad offense who on that particular Sunday just can't manufacture a bunch of offense. The guy who we definitely have an emergency panic button about, and that is going to be A.J. Brown of the Philadelphia Eagles. For whatever the reason is, Philadelphia is simply not passing the football enough and not giving him enough opportunities, and it's absolutely insane for a guy of his talent level. For us fantasy football owners, myself included, it's absolutely killing me. Can't afford to have a guy like this on the bench, but with the production he's putting in, it's really hurting your fantasy football team. Now let's move on to guys 31 through 40. I'll just highlight the couple bright spots that we have in the area. Khalil Shakur of the Buffalo Bills, Jalen Waddle of the Miami Dolphins. Both of those guys playing consistent enough that they can be in a flex spot in your lineup. And then we got a green X next to Marvin Harrison Jr., where hopefully his breakout game in week 4 at home against the Seattle Seahawks can propel him into being a consistent high performer for your fantasy football team. When you look at Terry McLaurin, Jawan Jennings, Brian Thomas, Jameson Williams, DJ Moore, Lad McConkey, just not good things going on for those guys. And then obviously when we get down here to 41 through 50, there's just not going to be a lot of bright spots. When you talk about Devonta Smith, who again tied in with A.J. Brown, simply can't make sense why that Philadelphia Eagles can't be more effective in the passing game. You have a receiver of that talent level. Some guys like Cedric Tillman, Calvin Austin, Hunter Renfrow, we knew that they were going to be lukewarm. Stephon Diggs, that's the guy I really wanted to highlight for the New England Patriots. I think he's ready to break out, had up over 100 yards. We talked about him on our final tune-up show on Sunday morning, so hopefully he can continue to be hot. And then the guy who you also see who looks like they could be thriving well, and that's going to be those Kansas City Chiefs wide receivers. When we talk about Xavier Worthy, came back yesterday, got right to business for the Kansas City Chiefs. And we know when Rashee Rice comes back for Kansas City, he is the top target for all-world quarterback Patrick Mahomes. All right, that is going to wrap up our segment for today. We didn't get a chance to get over to our tight end, so please make sure to check me out on my social media pages, on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram. I do a lot of other great content pieces there throughout the week, but definitely hit those pages to check out the tight end rankings. We'll see everyone back here next week on the Extra Points Fantasy Football Show, the place where you get expert fantasy advice for champions. Let's go.